For my latest Football Manager save, I decided to conquer the world using New York City FC. And with crazy goals like this one, this project was one of my all-time favorites. We moved up quickly and struggled against some of the best teams in the game. And, well, the entire save came to a sudden and abrupt end. And, honestly, that just seems so fitting for New York City, right? Anyways, you guys can tell this is going to be difficult than your typical YouTube Football Manager save report, right? I know what the big boys do. I know what the Lujos do, and, Omega Luke, and Tom FM and all these other guys who actually are making money off of this. Well, the thing is that here at Football Manager Projects, we do things differently, and this save was quite different. So I decided to manage New York City FC, but of course not in the MLS. Who would want to do that? Instead, I decided to play in the World Super League, a worldwide league that is probably the best custom scenario in all of Football Manager 2024. You wind up with a massive league pyramid structure featuring 1,216 teams from around the world all playing against each other. And it includes all sorts of nice extras such as numerous cup competitions, B-team leagues, youth leagues, and so on. And really, this is my favorite way to play. Like playing in normal country competitions, vanilla FM, it's okay, I guess. But when you do it this way, the challenge never ends. This allows you to aspire to taller heights than you ever could in a normal save. Anyway, the whole idea to do this goes back to a trip that we had as a family to New York City back in August 2023. We remained true to our roots by staying in Chinatown and Flushing. Of course, that's where baseball's New York Mets play, and Citi Field was like 15 minutes walking from our hotel. The site of the upcoming new New York City FC stadium is literally right next to Citi Field, though there wasn't much to see at the time. But the thing is, I didn't just want to do this save because it's over in Flushing, New York. No, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to develop a powerful team entirely through youth intake without doing any transfers at all. And so this was a combination of the World Super League and the Youth Academy Challenge, right? I wanted to see just how quickly we could get these young players established. Now, the truth is that New York City FC and Football Manager 2024 already has a number of really good young players, which makes this team ideal for this kind of save. The people who put together the database look fondly on otherwise obscure players, guys like Malachi Jones. And over time, we started to develop some pretty good young players, maybe not perfect, but certainly good enough to compete and with a lot of potential. But of course, youth intake only is not the New York City way. Nah, man, when your little town blues fade away and when you find yourself king of the hill, the pressure is on to go out there and to get the best of the best. And that is the way that football has always been in New York City. Well, back when the American League of Professional Football was first formed in 1894, there was a team in New York City, of course. The New York club featured pretty good coverage, especially on the front page of the sports-crazy New York World, which is one of the most important newspapers of the late 19th century. Brooklyn had a team as well, though the truth is that neither team drew particularly strong crowds. That professional league lasted less than a month before folding, after which association football in the United States turned into a long parade of semi-pro leagues. But New York City was always there, and it makes sense. New York City has always been an immigrant city, of course, and as you probably know, the only way you're going to get any sport to be respectable in the United States is by establishing a strong presence in the city. If you're not in New York, you're not nowhere. And of course, it only makes sense that New York City had multiple clubs in the American Soccer League when it was formed in 1921. This was the first truly viable professional football league in the United States. The 1920s is often thought of as the high point of football in the United States, back when some enthusiastic fans considered the ASL the real major league of the fall to springtime period. And I mean, there was some newspaper coverage, sure, though you'll notice if you look closely that most of these articles are about other sports. The truth is that the press was a lot more interested in a different kind of football, especially in the East. Okay, so I know I'm going to make a couple historians mad, but I might as well pitch you guys off anyway, right? Look, guys, the ASL was really not as popular as you guys keep saying. Like, yeah, it was big in Fall River, Massachusetts, which had like, I don't know, like 4 different daily newspapers. There were fans in St. Louis, and it got some press in parts of New York City. But there wasn't like this conspiracy that killed off the league or whatever. No, man, the truth is that American football, which was always the media darling sport and provided much more of a spectacle than association football, the truth is that American football was just more popular back then. So famously, in 1927, the owner of baseball's New York Giants, Charles Stoneham, bought a soccer team in Indiana and moved it to New York, despite the fact that New York already had an ASL team. This was kind of big news, though it was sandwiched between a comic strip and yet more baseball coverage. And honestly, there wasn't as much coverage of the sport as some fans would want you to believe. In their first season in New York, Stoneham's team managed to win the National Challenge Cup. Stoneham, who was also the ASL's vice president, then demanded that the professional teams all stay away from any non-league cup competitions, especially ones that featured amateur clubs. And to be honest with you guys, this makes sense to me, even though it's not popular among sport purists, right? So Stoneham was a baseball owner. He was trying to get football on the same level as baseball. He was looking at this and saying, look, why are we paying this stupid money to go to some podunk town to play against a semi-pro or an amateur team in front of literally nobody, right? What kind of stupid idea is this, right? If we're going to have a cup competition, let's just have it within the league itself among other professional teams. Let's focus on building up the professional level of the league, and we'll forget about the amateur and semi-pro teams. They can go have their own league. That's the way that every league works in the United States, right? Now, the thing that happened as a result of this standpoint, which I personally think is very logical, was like nothing but just absolute chaos. So after the ASL suspended 3 clubs for entering that National Challenge Cup in early 1928, those clubs broke off to form their own league. The United States Football Association, which was sort of like the English Football Association, promptly called the American Soccer League an outlaw league and favored the newly formed Eastern Professional Soccer League. This led to a period known as the Soccer Wars, where teams overspent in an attempt to outdo the other teams in the other leagues. After a little over a year of chaos, the American Soccer League did finally give in. So by 1930, things had more or less calmed down in time for the Great Depression. So these infamous soccer wars, this period that people have written so much about, it lasted like maybe a year and a half. And to be honest with you, if you were like the average Joe on the street, even in freaking Fall River, Massachusetts in 1929, you probably didn't know anything about this, right? Like the only newspapers that gave much reporting to this at all were in places like that Fall River, right? The rest of the country didn't care, paid no attention to it. And of course, as a result, the ASL wound up collapsing before too long. I mean, a lot of people have written about this league and how Stoneham allegedly killed it with his stubbornness. Now, Stoneham was crooked and he was a real jerk, but I actually think that his instincts about the American Soccer League were right on. Honestly, the real problem that the league faced was that America's modified form of rugby was just a more popular sport. So even in the highest point of the American Soccer League, the press coverage was abysmal at best. Anyway, on that tragic note, I will tell you about the tragedy of my first attempt at this New York City FC Youth Academy Challenge. Now, you can call this the story of how not to do a Youth Academy Challenge. Okay, so the truth is that I actually tried this save idea twice. And as you can see here, the first time I tried it, I used a ton of different editor data files. For my first attempt, I added in a ton of legendary players from the Legends of the Beautiful Games additional database. So, like I said at the beginning, the idea behind this was to demonstrate that I could create strong enough new gens to beat the best players of all time. And it didn't work out that well. So in this save, we had this tendency to blow it pretty much no matter what I did, largely because of the poor way that I managed the club. Now, a big part of the problem that I had with this save is that I started to move players out way too quickly before we had even played a match. However, you should know that this wasn't a problem because it made morale bad. Actually, morale doesn't really matter that much in Football Manager. Instead, this was a problem because I kind of got rid of all of our good players, and the young players we had on the club just weren't good enough yet. Now, this problem was exacerbated by the fact that every single club we were playing against had like all-time legends. New York City FC has been around for like 10 years, so there's no legendary players, right? We were playing against clubs that featured numerous all-time legends with like insane attributes, which meant that we were pretty much destined to lose. In fact, it really is a miracle that things didn't go worse. I mean, at least our youth intake looked reasonably good, though you have to remember that youth intake doesn't come until the season is almost over. And you also have to remember that these star ratings are relative to the strength of your team, so if your team really sucks, the youth intake will always look really good. We were in 13th place out of 20 at this time, which I guess shows that my transfers weren't quite as disastrous as they could have been. A few weeks later, however, we had slipped to 15th and we needed only one more win to keep away from the relegation zone. One of the reasons why this World Super League setup is so compelling is because you get moments like that, right? You're in this league filled with really good teams, and the difference between finishing mid-table and being relegated sometimes can only be a few points. It gives you this massive suspense throughout the entire season, and it makes it very difficult for you to dominate to the point where you're winning the league every season, right? Seriously, I was getting really nervous about this final win. Fortunately, we were able to score early in this match against Botafogo. The clinching second goal came in the 75th minute after a really good bit of teamwork. Amazingly, we pulled off a 2-0 victory, and I thought, hey, this save is off to a great start. So at this time I was telling myself this is great, the video I'm making at the end is going to be focused on not giving up, defying the odds, and so on and so forth. And I really did feel good about things at the end of that first season, but then came the second season. Okay, so the first real bad sign we had is when this guy, Josh Pimentel, was being scouted and tried to sign underneath us by some really big clubs. I started to freak out. I thought maybe the board had sold him from underneath me, and I noticed that there was nothing I could do. In the end, Pimentel signed with Manchester United. I don't know why he would want to do that, and we only got a lousy $1.2 million out of the deal. Now, the thing is, I had forgotten that you could go in and offer the player a new contract when this sort of thing happens. That's really what I should have done. So keep that in mind in case you have a superstar new gen and you have this problem, and it does happen from time to time. In fact, it happened to me again right afterwards. A player named Jorge Leon started receiving big offers from numerous clubs, and I was worried that the save was falling apart right in front of me. It was when I received this email that I realized what was going on and that I should have been offering professional contracts all along. Once we got Leon signed to a big boy contract, all of the vultures went away. Now, this was a sign of two different problems. The first one is that we had a lot of really good youngsters that needed high level attention, needed me to pay attention to it, and we're getting the biggest teams in the world to go after them, right? But you have to actually pay a lot of attention to them. It takes some time, and then you're like, well, do I bring him up to the first team? Am I worried that another team's going to poach him? Anyway, the second problem is that our club was not necessarily attractive enough for these players, and that's one of the things that really hurt us in the end. I mean, I guess the season started out well enough, but we simply couldn't deal with the quality that the other teams in the league had. Our keepers were awful, as you can see here, and the losses really started to mount. It took us forever to get even a single victory, and things started to go from bad to worse. And I started seeing these warning messages about the fans getting frustrated with my tactics. But as bad as that was, it was not the worst of it. No, the worst of it is when our new gen started to not want to sign with us or play with us anymore. When we lost this match to Valencia, I was convinced that I was going to be sacked right away. However, even though we were in the relegation zone, the board was happy that I wasn't playing a new gen named Johnny Shore anymore, and so they decided not to fire me. The problems came when our best new gens decided that they were going to explore their options at the end of their contracts. Now, if you've ever been through this before, you know how it feels. There's nothing you can do. And well, after suffering loss after loss and winding up in last place, I decided to end this save and put it out of its misery. I mean, the Youth Academy Challenge, as much as I love it, it's just not fun if you're losing all of your good young players at the beginning, right? I figured that I did the wrong thing. I sold way too many players at the start of the save, and that including all of those legendary players was really a problem. And so I decided to, give it another try, and sometimes you just do have to give it another try. Speaking of a second try, if you know anything about the history of football in New York, you certainly know about the Cosmos. The Cosmos were born in December 1970 in the infamous North American Soccer League, and notice that the team was founded by a record executive. And a few months after the team was born, the nickname Cosmos came around after a rigged fan naming contest. So in 1970-71, New York had recently added the New York Mets in baseball. Mets is short for the Metropolitans, right? Just rolls off your tongue, Metropolitans. And so like the Cosmos fit, if you think of it not as like the space cosmos, but rather as being short for cosmopolitan. See what they did there, right? Anyway, this was a gimmick, but it wasn't all that successful, and it didn't really help give the team any attention at all. Part of the problem was that the team's stadium kept changing, starting with Yankee Stadium, which of course was way too big. By 1972, they were in Hofstra Stadium on Long Island. And in 1974, they moved again, this time to Downing Stadium on Randall's Island. I mean, it's not like the Cosmos were moving from city to city or anything like that. It's just that it's not a good sign when like the old stadium is still there, but you're not playing it in it anymore because like there were nothing but empty seats. That's what was going on. So the Cosmos in the early years really had a hard time building up any kind of tradition. There was basically no television coverage of the team, and I wouldn't be surprised if most people in the city didn't even know that the team existed. But then came 1975. There were rumors that he was coming throughout early 1975, rumors that were actually published all over the United States. Pelé reportedly rejected an early offer in late April 1975, but of course that wasn't the final offer. The Cosmos ownership simply refused to give up in a way that I don't think you can replicate in Football Manager. And it got to the point where the Cosmos were offering to pay his taxes for him to get into the contract, close to an offer he couldn't refuse. In the end, of course, the Cosmos got their man. Signing Pelé really revolutionized the NASL. Nobody in the United States had even heard of this stupid league before 1975, and the few games that were on television were on like the variety sports television programs, ABC's Wide World of Sports, stuff like that. But the thing is, by summer 1975, the NASL had become big news, like international news, and all of a sudden, the Cosmos were the most recognizable team in the league. Well, the signing of Pelé sparked a fury of Cosmos spending, including for players like the legendary Carlos Alberto. The temperamental Italian striker Georgios Chinaglia signed with the Cosmos in 1976 and became the top scorer in the history of the NASL. Franz Beckenbauer followed him before too long, and soon the Cosmos had one of the most impressive rosters in the entire world. Now, I do not think that the Cosmos of the late 1970s were the best team in the world, that's for sure. Pelé retired partway through the 1977 season, and the Cosmos were never exactly like invincible in the NASL. A lot of the stars were older, and they were just looking for a big American payday before retirement. And you're probably wondering how in the world the Cosmos could afford all of this stuff, right? The truth is that the New York football empire was built on the back of Warner Communications, which is the entity that owned the Cosmos. So as you recall, I mentioned earlier that the original owners of the team were executives with a record label, Atlantic Records. Atlantic was owned by Warner Communications, a huge media company that was apparently more than happy to park insane amounts of money into the fledgling football experiment. The rule in those days was that the Cosmos would spend whatever it would take to win, and anything short of winning was simply not acceptable. And in a very real sense, they were the Yankees of association football in America. But of course, none of this was sustainable. So there's some quote out there somewhere about like Warner being asked about, how it was having the Cosmos losing like millions of dollars every year. And they were like, oh, that's, whatever percentage of the stock price or something like that. But like Warner Communications, these people were businessmen. At some point in time, you do want to see some sort of return on your investment, right? The Cosmos were outspending every other team in the NASL by a big margin, but they were having a hard time dominating the league. And a lot of other teams started to go after big players they couldn't afford, which is the reason why the finances of the league started to give way, right? It was an arms race. You don't want those nuclear arms races in your sports leagues. Now, the bizarre championship playoff was also like a real problem, right? But the biggest problem of all is that the demand just wasn't there. You will read occasionally about huge crowds over a Giant stadium for the Cosmos. Cosmos went in there in 1976, the first year of Giant Stadium, because somebody had to be there. It was publicly financed, right? But what you're not reading in those articles is that the team was literally giving away tickets for free to make sure that enough seats were filled for television. Another major issue was the quality of play, especially on those awful artificial turf stadiums. I mean, the players did what they could to try to lighten up the mood a little bit. But the best team that money could buy simply couldn't dominate supposedly inferior competition. And some bouts of really poor refereeing also hurt the league immensely. And to think that all of those clips come from the greatest game in the history of the NASL. Anyway, the NASL was fairly strong by the time 1980 rolled around, but it was also showing some really severe signs of problems. And well, the problem is that sometimes in life you only get that one chance at hitting the big time. But, you know, in Football Manager, sometimes you do get that second chance. Well, since I believe in second chances, I went for it again, though I disabled the legendary players this time around. And this time I decided to keep preseason transfers to a minimum in hopes of keeping the squad happy. The result was really impressive.
Nicely measured pass. Oh, special! That is a special goal!
We absolutely blew the league apart in our first couple of matches, and we looked unstoppable for a little while. So it turned out, after all, the New York City FC already had a really good young team, including a lot of homegrown young players, without me needing to add in a whole ton of new gens. I mean, who would have thought? Anyway, this was one of those dream seasons that only come along like every now and then, and I loved every minute of it. I mean, not everything was perfect. We had this really annoying habit of giving up goals near the end of matches that we should have won easily. I don't know, maybe they were tired, it's hard to tell.
Coming in at the back stick. There's a goal!
And we were also lucky from time to time thanks to some really ridiculous own goals.
Playing with a nice finish right from the top draw.
Ah yes, there's nothing like Football Manager for those crazy own goals. Anyway, the board did a whole bunch of those classic New York City things, and I did my best to ignore them and just focus on winning, which is probably what those old New York Cosmos should have done. The board was delighted that we made the knockout stages of one of the extra competitions, and so they generously offered to give me more transfer funds for a manager that wasn't ever going to sign anybody. Alright, I'll be blunt about this. I've gone back and forth on this in my mind. I really wish, though, that we had a Youth Academy Challenge mode in the game, one that would have the board take that money and put it into developing our facilities instead of putting it into the transfer budget. But then again, I also wish we could just have the league without those extra competitions, right? So despite the fact that the World Super League itself is international and integrated, the reputation system in Football Manager means that you still have to have the extra competitions. But in the end, they didn't hurt us. For a little while, I was worried that we were going to blow it, especially when we got this red card at the end of the first leg of this Cup quarterfinal.
Well, there's certainly going to be a card, just a question of colour.
As if it were scripted, we gave up the game-winning goal seconds later, and the worst part is that it went in off of our own defender.
Wonderful!
We got our revenge in the second leg, however, scoring early and often.
Oh, it's a beauty!
This is around the time I really thought this was going to be a special save.
It's in!
And meanwhile, back in the league, we started to build up this huge lead. And that's why this season was really something special. We won the league on May 4th with a dominant victory against Celta Vigo.
Tearing defences upset.
While we might have been offside a couple of these times, our victory was still pretty convincing.
It really is a finish of the highest order.
This penalty in the 68th minute put the result beyond any doubt.
Yes!
Unfortunately, Football Manager didn't let me see our winning celebration.
Well, it shouldn't have ended like that. It's a shame. Everything was...
However, I do know that we clinched since it was one of the options for the post-game talk. And we still had one more competition to play for. So this is one of those international cup competitions. It's titled the UEFA Cup 2, though it has nothing to do with UEFA at all, right? And you have teams from all over the world. The naming is kind of odd. Anyway, our biggest problem was that we were missing a few key players, but at least we tried. We went down early on another one of those deflection goals that just drive you nuts. We were able to equalize later in the first half.
What can they make of it? A good area. They've done it!
But then our defense really fell apart.
Too much further. Has just said play on. Now then.
This ridiculous goal was the part where I was ready to just give up.
Beautifully weighted. A finish right from the top drawer.
We did manage to score this fluke at the very end, but it was all over but the shouting. And the worst injustice of all is the fact that the computer control team got that winning celebration. That's the one I wanted to see us have. Well, I guess you can't win them all, I suppose. Anyway, that set up the second season, which was going to be a lot more difficult. I mean, it's nice that I entered the European Rule of Honor after only a single season at an American team, but we really hadn't done much. You see, the way this scenario is set up is with a 40-team Premier League that generally features only the top clubs in the world. You wind up with a 39-game season, one match against each other team, which means you don't have a lot of second opportunities once you screw things up. And that really should have been a warning lesson for me. We were good, yeah, but we weren't really good enough for this kind of Premier League, and that became apparent right from the start. I mean, this looked really ugly right from the first match of the season. We did somehow manage to score a goal or two against Chelsea, but it was clear right from the start that this was going to be a very different season. And man, we really had our ups and downs. So when you make it to a league like this, you know that you're going to have frustration in most of your matches, especially early in the season. You start looking at the schedule and you start looking for a few moments of relief. And they do come eventually. I mean, we never stood a chance against teams like FC Bayern München, that's for sure. But we did manage a crazy victory at home against Wolfsburg after another bizarre defensive decision. And we also looked really good against Nottingham Forest. We came close to a victory against Rangers here, but they did manage to equalize. But at least we got 1 point from the draw. Now, what I didn't realize during all of this is that the pressure was mounting. You see, in the unsuccessful save, I was under tons of pressure in the second season, but I managed to hold on to the job by benching some random player, whatever. In the second save, however, the board didn't talk to me at all, and so what happened came completely out of the blue. I mean, we were looking really good in the Europa League 1, for example, and I thought that the board loved that. We had some poor luck in the Premier League, but seriously, we were up against some really good teams. And I mean, sure, we were in the relegation zone, but only just barely, and there was still time left. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm too optimistic for this game, right? Anyway, the disaster came against Liverpool, who had won the freaking Premier League the year before. I mean, the funny thing about this match is that we actually had the lead at the very beginning. As usual, though, it wasn't long before it started to rain goals again. We lost this one 5-1, which honestly is not that bad when you consider that we were away from home against literally the best team in the league. But that apparently wasn't good enough for the board. So in that classic Football Manager style, I found myself suddenly fighting for my job with the board not even the slightest bit interested in what I had accomplished in the past. That message highlighted in red is like having your boss ask you to see you in his office. I did my best to defend myself. In the end, though, there was nothing I could say, and so they fired me. Now, I really wanted to go like way out into the future and see how things were going, but honestly, it was taking way too long to holiday. I got like 2.5 months done in like a half hour of real time, and I decided just to end it and take a look. As you can imagine, the team was playing horribly without me. It turns out I wasn't the problem after all. Player morale was down in the dumps, of course. I had been fired after all for no reason. They went with some stupid defensive tactic that wasn't working. And the funny thing is that I'm listed under favored personnel, even though they fired me for basically no reason. But you know what's funny about this? That's actually one of those classic New York moments, right? Everything good always seems to come crashing down, and it's always a case of, well, what have you done for me lately? All right, I'll give you an example. Back in 1960, the New York Yankees won the American League pennant in baseball. The Yankees had a legendary team with like Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, both in their prime. Sure, the Yankees lost the World Series that year, but that was on a fluke and the team was still dominant. Besides, the Bronx Bombers were being managed by Casey Stengel, who was already treated as a legend by the media. Sure enough, though, the old professor got the axe less than a week after that narrow World Series loss. And it happens over and over again. The question is never like how legendary you are or what you did in the past. It's always, well, what did you do for me lately? You didn't do anything, you keep losing. That's the New York style, and I swear that's what really bit me. So the Cosmos and the NASL suffered from a similar short-sighted attitude. You know that famous Whitecaps at Cosmos game from 1979? That was really the high point of the league. Even though this match was extremely entertaining, though, nobody was interested in the NASL after this one. ABC decided against renewing the NASL's national television contract, and then the league basically collapsed on itself. And I cannot emphasize enough just how important those major media contracts are to sports leagues in the United States. Again, it doesn't matter how good you are. Unless there's a way for tons of people to watch your games easily, nobody will care and nobody will follow you. This is the exact problem that the MLS has had after it put its games under the stupid Apple paywall, right? It's a really good way to ruin a league that's doing otherwise pretty well. What's worse, in the early 1980s, Warner Communication was targeted by Rupert Murdoch. This is back when Murdoch was trying to buy up as many media companies as humanly possible. In the middle of that takeover talk, there were rumors that Warner was finally going to sell off the Cosmos. The Cosmos could still draw a crowd, but mostly for friendlies against big European clubs like this one against Hamburg. And by 1983, even soccer-crazy cities like Montreal were looking at dwindling attendance figures. And the worst thing is you couldn't even watch the games on television. If you can't see the games on TV, it's like you're not even playing them, right? It's like the tree falling down in the woods. Anyway, that was the writing that was on the wall. In the end, the biggest problem was fan apathy, and there's no way to spend yourself out of that pickle. The indoor league didn't really help much, and there were crazy stories about the Cosmos hiring players, paying them nothing, and then quietly releasing them for no reason. Finally, in late July 1984, Warner sold off the Cosmos. The NASL itself only managed to hold on for a few more months.
Chico, onside to Bogey, tried to lift it over Toth. There's Moyers and a goal, no offside. The entire play.
And well, that was it for the Cosmos and the old NASL. Sure, you've got like the Red Bull team these days, but nobody cares about the stupid MLS. And then there's New York City FC, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I even care about that team anymore, right? And not after what they did to me. But it's never going to be like it was with the old Cosmos. Anyway, when you look at these two stories, I do think that there is one major lesson that really stands out. The lesson is that you really need to figure out how to build things up from scratch the right way instead of taking shortcuts. My save would have been much better and would have lasted longer if I had started off with a lower league side and built things up gradually over time. The Cosmos, meanwhile, would have likely had more fan loyalty if they had developed good young players instead of spending infinite money on foreign stars. Now, that's not to say that I'm against foreign transfers. Actually, I think it's a great thing. But you're never going to develop a real loyal fan base if everybody is imported. You've got to develop somebody at some point in time. However, in the case of both of these teams, the real way to develop long-term loyalty and to get long-term success is to set yourself up to succeed from the beginning. And that means going slow, giving yourself time, and putting in that time and effort. I mean, those old Cosmos games really are a lot of fun to watch. And my save was a lot of fun while it lasted, even if I did have to deal with these stupid set-piece goals all the time.
Looking to go deep. Intercepted.
But the reality is that I didn't develop the sort of feeling for my players that I usually do since the save was so short. And it was really hard for Cosmos fans to really get to know the team because of all the endless transfers that took place every single season. You see, guys, in the end, sports are all about the storyline. If you want a great Football Manager save, one that's going to get a better video than this, you need a better storyline, right? You need something that really captivates you. And the same counts for sports in real life. Just like winning isn't enough, and spending all the money to win is not enough. It's not that you win, it really is how you win. And maybe that's the thing that the New York approach to sports gets wrong in the end, right? It is important to win, right? But if you win the long way without those stupid shortcuts, it's going to be a lot more rewarding. Anyway, as far as these saves are concerned, if you're interested in the save file, I'm going to share them with you guys. Go check it out over on Patreon. It's like $5 tier and up. You can go download these save files, knock yourself out with them, play along, fix my mistakes. Let me know what you think. Check out the link in the video description. I'll talk with you guys again next week. Bye.